Please join me in welcoming BenMartin.
Okay, very good to see everybody here. It's really important to have those ideas in command when you are ready to do your advocacy, whether you're advocating at the state level, as kind of was just talking about, or I am going to be talking more about what happens at the local level. So, Oh, and I also wanted to remind everybody that, and I put this in the chat a little bit earlier, but remember that as far as education is concerned and arts education is concerned, we have to constantly remember to advocate for full funding for the foundation formula and transportation formulas through DESE. As long as that funding is complete, school districts feel much less pressure to make cuts themselves. And of course, whenever they are pressured, then they start looking for where are we going to make cuts, and we're vulnerable in that area. So I'm going to share my screen here in just a second. It's going to come up as a Tip O'Neill was famous for saying all politics is local. It's actually a much older quote than that, but I think it is still true. I think we can have some of our most effective work done as arts advocates when we're talking to people locally within our community. Quite often, we miss out on some of the things that we really need to be doing, though, because we keep thinking about our classroom and our building. And community advocacy for arts education goes beyond that. So let's take a look at this. So anyhow, when you were coming up with ideas, we started to try to figure out what's the rationale for arts education. Here are some of the ones that I have seen used in the past. It's by no means an exhaustive list of all the rationales, but it is one that goes perhaps a little bit further than some of the ideas that you came up with, although you'll recognize some of the ideas that you mentioned here too. Participating in or viewing the arts, valuable educational tool just in and of itself, art for art's sake. Participating in or viewing the arts makes better students, literally students, and studies are now bearing this out. Students become better students because they are involved in arts education. Satisfies our needs for a creative outlet. That was one of the ones that was definitely talked about in the chat room. Participating in or viewing the arts, a therapeutic activity. And boy, do we need therapy. I think one thing we've discovered after these 2 years is that we are all just a little bit mentally ill right now. We all need some form of therapy, whether it be drastic or whether it be simply somebody saying, hey, it's going to be okay, and hang in there. But it's a therapeutic activity as well, and can be used by schools, by school systems, for that purpose. The record of who we are as a culture. We are literally making history when we make art. Cultural value to the society as a whole. We become a richer, more complete society when we have a vibrant arts scene. Here's what we quite often forget, that the arts are a financial and employment driver for our society. There are jobs out there. There is economic impact out there when people are involved in arts activities. And there is economic impact to arts education activities as well. We all have budgets, large or small, but we have to buy those supplies and do those things someplace in our community, and so money goes back into the community. Even the fact that our arts teachers are paid a salary and they then go to the grocery store and they pay rent and that kind of thing, that is an economic impact. So if all of those rationale are true, then why is it that arts programs are the ones that always seem to be at the greatest risk than other programs when schools face those budget issues? Let's concentrate here on what we need to do to make sure that when it comes to cutting budgets or when it comes to any kind of tight times, the arts are not necessarily the first thing that is thought of within a school district. So one of the problems that we have simply is advocacy. We're just not good yet at selling the importance of the arts to people in the US. We keep thinking of them as frills. We keep hearing that over and over again. And we have to find some way to move that conversation into the mainstream. The student voice, I think, is crucial. And this is something I've been preaching for 20 years now, that the student voice is a crucial voice to be heard, especially the high school student voice. When it comes to advocacy, we started a program with the Alliance a number of years ago, sending kids to Washington, D.C., came out of the Show Me Arts programs, and we would take them to Washington to talk to national legislators. And we have a whole bunch of pictures here on the screen of some of our more successful individuals. And you'll also see some faces that you probably recognize in terms of national legislators as well. But something special happens within that room when you walk in and there's a student in the room instead of just adults. I mean, if I walk in, the legislative aide or the legislator themselves see somebody coming in with handouts saying, gimme, gimme, gimme. And they have their defenses up. A student walks in and suddenly that legislator or that legislative aide wants to make sure that that student knows that what they're doing is important, that what the aide is doing, what the legislator is doing is important, that public service is indeed an honorable profession. And so instead of it being a defensive reaction of, okay, what do you want now? It's more along the lines of, here, let me show you how we operate, the things that we do. And yes, I'll listen to you. And if that student is able to express themselves well with what the ask actually is and the evidence that backs up that ask, then we get a different kind of hearing, a different kind of listening that goes on at that particular point. And so you have these wonderful moments like the picture in the center. I think you can see my arrow there with Madison Dodd from Winnetonka High School back in 2015 it was, talking to one of the legislative aides of Washington and just really zeroing in on him. So that's something to keep in mind here. Students have a voice and students can be very effective advocates for us when it comes to the arts. But it's also important, especially at the local level, to find the real decision makers. And here's where I was talking about, we so often get trapped in our rooms at our buildings, and we think if we have a problem, we have to go to our principal, our head of department, whatever it might be. We should be thinking beyond that. We should be trying to find the real decision makers within our district. This is something that happens from day one when you first get that job as an arts teacher. Start making those connections, networking with the community, and getting them on your side. The Chamber of Commerce, the bankers, the real estate agents, the insurance people, all of those individuals have a vested interest in making their community as vibrant and acceptable as possible to people who may want to move in or to the people who simply live there. If you can start to convince them that the arts are an important part of that vibrancy within that community, they become your allies. And quite simply, if we come to a point where a school district says, well, we have to cut something, then those allies can be there going to the Board of Education, the superintendent, and saying, well, you're not going to cut this because number one, it's important. Number two, my daughter or son may be involved in it as well. And those items become huge supporting blocks for you. And state and federal legislators also, start having them show up to your arts events, and suddenly everybody in town takes notice that they were there. And number two, those state and federal legislators have a wonderful time coming and talking and being seen in public, and they thank you for providing those opportunities. And as a response to that thanks, they'll listen to some of the things that you're asking them to do as well. So keep that in mind. It's not just about convincing your principal. It's not just about convincing the superintendent. It is about convincing the community, and find the people who really make the choices in your community. So why is arts education an issue? A couple of different things. Number one, scarce resources. This year is actually very unusual because we have just a flood of money coming in from the federal government. Next year will be a bit of a shock to us because that money won't be there. And school districts are going to have to figure out, okay, we spent a whole lot of money last year, but we aren't going to have the same amount to spend this year. So that's something to keep in mind that we're planning for next year now. in terms of the kind of advocacy we do. Don't let a shortage or a scarcity next year impact your program into the future. Be sure that you're advocating now for the value of your program. So we need to find other ways to make sure that that information is there. There are good studies out there now that talk about the ways that the arts have an impact on students and student achievement across the board. And we just need to talk more about that and make sure that those real decision makers understand that beyond just the scorecard of the APRs on the tests and such. With all of that in mind, arts education, however, remains very popular. This came about from a One Arts KC study that was done in 2014. They surveyed stakeholders throughout the city of Kansas City, trying to find out what they thought was going to be important for education within the city. Arts education in all forms was the highest priority in this study that people did. Their expressions of support for lifelong learning, as well as supporting and developing K through 12 arts education. Now that is in 2014. It's a little bit in the past. Today, the big push seems to be on workforce development and such. So you have to keep that in mind. But right behind that workforce development, we'll find the arts. And I think we'll also be able to do some good demonstration that the arts are right in the middle of that workforce development too. I often hear people say, we have no idea what the jobs of the future are going to be. And I say, bull, that's not true. We know exactly what the jobs of the future are going to be. They're going to be jobs that involve technological knowledge and innovation and creativity. And innovation and creativity is right in our wheelhouse. And we ought to be talking more and more about that. So here's the argument in brief that you can make to support arts education within schools. Arts-enriched schools do a better job of educating students. We have all kinds of studies. You can see the cover pages of all those different studies right there. You can find them. If that's so, then better schools create a better quality of life in a community. And here's a nice little infographic that it sort of follows that logic there. So if the arts create better schools, and better schools create a better quality of life in a community, then arts-enriched schools ought to be supported in every community. Keep that in mind then. It really is a pretty simple step-by-step process to be able to argue that, as long as you have the evidence that backs it up. Where is that evidence? Well, okay. I think you can find in every school district, there are things to brag about when it comes to the arts programs. Make sure you do that. Never miss a chance to brag about those programs. And programs that have succeeded, again, demonstrating success. And then we get into the evidence itself. Why Art is a wonderful program out of University of San Marcos, California, San Marcos in California. And they have these posters and cards, and note the specific arguments that are made here. So that's Why Art. It's a great resource, and Phyllis and Andrea can point you to those resources too. And just in case you missed it, the Alliance a number of years ago actually came up with studies where arts education makes a difference in Missouri schools, and then still makes a difference in Missouri schools about 5 years later. And you can note the things that are specified within those two studies that demonstrate how students do better and schools do better with the arts in them. Preparing students for jobs. The Creative Industries Brief that comes out of Washington talks about the jobs in Missouri that are creative and innovative, the creative industries. And that's 70,000 jobs here in Missouri. So that's not just a small amount. That's a lot of jobs that students can be prepared for if we are giving them proper training in the arts in schools. But so why are we so concerned? And there's the arguments about why we ought to be concerned about budget shortfalls, past results. Something that is still, I think, a concern here is a focus on remediation. How many of you are hearing at your schools that student learning loss has happened, and we need to make up for that? And unfortunately, what happens quite often is people double down on math classes or English classes, which if you're doubling down on that means you can't take a class someplace else. and so we lose the arts classes. There we go. So we have this presentation that I made on the Missouri Alliance for Arts Education website. So you can find it. Feel free to adapt it, use it however you want to. But there are ways to convince people at the local level that arts education is an important part of what they're doing when it comes to school. In the curriculum, in extracurricular, overall programming, I think you really need to do everything you can to advocate at the local level and make sure that the decisions that are made there support the arts programs that you have and that you enjoy so much. So thank you for letting me talk to you tonight. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. You can put them in the chat, or you can just pop in and ask the question in person too.